London, in the year 1765, rests beneath a veil of fog so thick that the city seems to exist in a world between waking and dreaming. The cobblestones glisten with morning dampness, reflecting the soft glow of oil lamps that flicker in the windows of townhouses along Grosvenor Square. It is here, in one of these elegant homes, that young William Ashford, barely 20 years of age, stands before a window, his breath misting the glass as he peers out into the gray morning. Today is the day he has long anticipated, the day he begins his grand tour, that venerable tradition of education and discovery that will carry him across Europe to the ancient wonders of Rome, Pompeii, and beyond. His trunk sits packed and ready in the entrance hall below, filled with sketchbooks, journals, warm coats, and letters of introduction to diplomats and scholars in distant cities. The household has been awake since before dawn, arranging the final details, preparing the carriage, ensuring that everything is in perfect order for the young master's departure. William's tutor, Mr. Pemberton, a learned man of middle years with gentle eyes and an encyclopedic knowledge of classical history, will accompany him on this journey, serving as both guide and companion through the wonders of the ancient world. As William turns from the window, he feels the weight of anticipation settle over him like a cloak, warm and reassuring. This journey will transform him, he knows, will open his eyes to the great civilizations that came before, to the wisdom carved in marble and stone. The fog outside seems to promise mystery and adventure, wrapping the familiar streets of London in unfamiliarity, as if the city itself is bidding him farewell, releasing him into the wider world. Soon, the carriage will depart, wheels turning on wet stone, carrying him away from everything he has known toward horizons he can only imagine. The carriage rocks gently as it makes its way through the awakening streets of London, past shops still shuttered, past market squares where early vendors are beginning to arrange their wares, past the great dome of St. Paul's rising like a phantom through the fog. William sits inside, cushioned against the velvet seats, with Mr. Pemberton beside him already reading from a small leather-bound volume of Virgil, his lips moving silently as he traces the Latin verses. The rhythmic clatter of hooves on cobblestones creates a soothing percussion, a steady beat that will accompany them for miles and days to come. As they leave the city behind, the fog begins to thin, revealing the gentle green countryside of southern England, fields rolling away toward distant horizons, hedgerows marking ancient boundaries, small villages nestled around Norman church towers. The air smells of earth and grass and the distant promise of the sea. William watches it all pass by his window, this familiar landscape now made precious by the knowledge that he is leaving it behind, perhaps for a year or more. Mr. Pemberton occasionally points out a landmark, a Roman road still visible as a straight line across a hillside, an old monastery where manuscripts were preserved through dark centuries. Each observation a small lesson, a gentle preparation for the greater antiquities they will encounter. The journey to Dover takes the better part of 2 days, with overnight rest at a coaching inn where the fire crackles warmly and the innkeeper's wife serves them beef pie and small beer. William lies awake that first night, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of a strange bed, a strange room, and feels both excitement and a tender homesickness stirring in his chest. But sleep comes eventually, as it always does, carrying him on gentle currents toward morning. The next day brings them within sight of the White Cliffs, and then to Dover itself, where the English Channel spreads before them like hammered pewter under gray skies, and the packet boat awaits to carry them across to France. The crossing of the Channel is neither smooth nor particularly rough, but rather settles into that middle state of constant rhythmic motion that eventually becomes almost hypnotic. The packet boat rises and falls with swells that have traveled across hundreds of miles of open water, and William stands at the rail, face turned toward France, watching the white cliffs of Dover diminish behind them until they are nothing more than a pale smudge on the horizon. Seabirds wheel overhead, their cries lonely and strange, and the smell of salt spray fills the air with its sharp, clean scent. Mr. Pemberton has retired below deck, never having been fond of sea travel, but William finds himself energized by the crossing, by this literal threshold between his old life and whatever awaits him on the far shore. Other travelers share the deck with him: merchants and diplomats, a family with small children, an elderly woman with a bird cage covered in cloth. All of them suspended between countries, between identities, rocking gently on the gray-green water. Hours pass in this state of liminal drift, time measured not by clocks, but by the gradual appearance of the French coast, rising from the sea like a promise being kept. When they finally dock at Calais, William feels the strange solidity of land beneath his feet once more, and realizes that he has truly left England now, has stepped into the wider continent, where different languages flow around him like music in unfamiliar keys. The French countryside, as they travel south and east, reveals itself as a tapestry of vineyards and wheat fields, stone villages clustered around fountains in village squares, roads lined with poplars standing like sentinels. The carriage they have hired in Calais is perhaps less comfortable than the one that carried them from London, but William finds he doesn't mind the harder seats, the creaking springs, the way dust rises from the road and settles on everything like fine powder. It is all part of the journey, all part of the transformation he feels beginning within himself. Days blend into one another as they travel deeper into France, following roads that have been traveled by pilgrims and merchants, by armies and lovers, for centuries beyond counting. Each evening, they stop at an inn or lodging house, where William practices his French with varying degrees of success, where Mr. Pemberton discusses philosophy with local scholars or priests over wine that tastes of sunlight and earth. The tutor is patient with William's education, never forcing lessons, but allowing them to arise naturally from their surroundings. When they pass a Roman aqueduct, its arches marching across a valley in perfect formation, Pemberton speaks of engineering and empire, of how the Romans brought water and order to lands they conquered, leaving behind these monuments that outlasted the civilization that built them. When they rest in the shade of an ancient church, he tells of how knowledge was preserved through medieval centuries, copied by hand in monastery scriptoriums, kept alive like a flame sheltered from wind. William absorbs it all, filling his journal with sketches and observations, with questions he hopes to answer when they finally reach Rome itself. The landscape begins to change as they approach the Alps, the flat or gently rolling country giving way to hills, then to mountains that rise in the distance like waves frozen at their crest. The air grows cooler, thinner, scented with pine and snow even in summer. They pass through valleys where small villages cling to mountainsides, where waterfalls tumble down rocks worn smooth by millennia of falling water, where the sound of cowbells drifts on the evening breeze like distant music. William finds himself growing quieter as they climb higher, as if the mountains command a reverent silence. At night, the stars are brighter here than they ever were in London, and he lies in his bed at some high inn and watches them through the window, those same stars that shone on Roman travelers 2,000 years ago, on Greek philosophers and Egyptian priests, connecting him across time to all those who have looked up in wonder at the vast, wheeling cosmos. The crossing of the Alps is an experience William knows he will carry with him for the rest of his life. This passage through peaks and clouds, through air so clear and cold it seems to ring like crystal when he breathes. The carriage climbs slowly, steadily, following roads that wind back and forth across mountainsides, gaining altitude through patience rather than haste. There is no rushing here, no way to hurry the journey. And William finds himself grateful for this enforced slowness, this opportunity to watch the world unfold at the pace of hoofbeats and turning wheels. They pass through villages where the houses have thick walls and small windows against the winter cold, where smoke rises from chimneys even now in the mild season, where the people regard them with curious but friendly eyes. Pemberton points out where Hannibal is said to have crossed with his elephants, bringing war to Rome from an unexpected direction, and William tries to imagine those ancient columns of soldiers and beasts struggling through snow, driven by ambition and necessity. At the highest passes, the wind blows constantly, carrying with it the smell of snow and stone and the vast emptiness of high places. And then, gradually, they begin to descend, leaving the peaks behind, dropping down into Italy, into warmth and the scent of cypress and olive groves. The light changes, becoming softer, more golden, as if the sun itself is different here, more generous, more welcoming. The road improves, becoming wider, better maintained, and they pass more travelers now, all flowing toward the eternal city that awaits them like a destination and a dream. William feels anticipation building in his chest like a tide, knowing that soon, in days rather than weeks now, he will walk streets where emperors walked, will stand before monuments he has only read about in books. But for now, there is still this gentle motion, this rhythm of travel, the carriage rocking him like a cradle as the Italian countryside spreads before him in shades of gold and green and dusty blue, as the light softens toward evening, as the stars begin to emerge one by one in the darkening sky, as Mr. Pemberton's voice grows softer, reading quietly from his book, as William's eyelids grow heavy, as sleep approaches on gentle feet, bringing with it dreams of ancient columns and marble gods and all the wonders that await him in the eternal city that draws steadily closer with each turning of the wheels, each beat of hooves on ancient stone, each breath, each moment, each soft, inevitable surrender to rest. The eternal city reveals itself slowly, as all sacred things must, emerging from the soft veil of dawn like a memory rising from the depths of sleep. William wakes in the carriage to find the world transformed, the darkness giving way to that particular quality of light that exists only in Rome, only in these hours when night releases its hold and morning has not yet claimed its kingdom. Through the window, he sees it, the first column, standing alone against the pale sky, its weathered surface catching the earliest rays of sun, and then another, and another still. The forum opens before them like a book written in stone, each page turned by centuries, each word a testament to the endless patience of history. The carriage slows, then stops, and in that stopping, time itself seems to pause, to gather its breath before the threshold of something vast and ancient and impossibly beautiful. Mr. Pemberton's hand rests gently on William's shoulder, a touch that says what words cannot, that they have arrived, that the journey has led them here, to this moment, to this place where emperors walked and senators debated, and all the grand machinery of empire once turned with relentless purpose, now silenced, now sleeping, now waiting for those who come to witness what remains. They descend from the carriage, feet touching Roman stones, and the city seems to welcome them with a silence that is not empty, but full, pregnant with the voices of millennia, whispering in a language that requires no translation. The air smells of old stone and wild herbs growing between ancient paving stones, of bread baking in nearby houses where modern Romans are beginning their day, unaware or perhaps too accustomed to the wonders that surround them. William's legs are stiff from travel, but he barely notices, his attention captured entirely by the scene before him. The tumbled columns, the standing arches, the fragments of temples and basilicas that once stood complete and glorious and are now returned to a state that somehow seems more honest, more true, laid bare by time's patient hand. They walk forward, slowly as pilgrims walk, with reverence and wonder, and a kind of exhaustion that opens the soul to deeper seeing. Each step takes them further into the heart of antiquity. Each breath draws in air that has circled this place for thousands of years, and William feels himself becoming part of something larger than his own small life. His own brief moment in the endless procession of moments that have passed this way before. They stand before the Colosseum as the sun climbs higher, painting its massive walls in shades of honey and amber, and William understands for the first time what the word monument truly means. Not merely a large structure, but a marker in time, a place where history has condensed into stone so dense that centuries cannot erode its essential presence. The arches rise in tiers, one above another, a rhythm of light and shadow that repeats and repeats, creating a pattern that the eye can follow into a kind of trance. Pemberton speaks softly, reciting lines from Martial, from Statius, descriptions of games and spectacles, of crowds roaring and emperors presiding, but his voice is gentle, not dramatic, letting the words float on the warm air like seeds on wind, some landing in William's consciousness, others drifting past, and it doesn't matter which is which. What matters is the standing here, the being present to this presence, this thing that has outlasted the empire that built it, the religion that once condemned it, the ages that have flowed around it like water around an ancient stone in a streambed. William pulls out his sketchbook, his fingers moving slowly to capture the curve of an arch, the texture of brick and travertine, the way light pools in the deep recesses where once there were corridors and chambers and all the complex machinery of entertainment and death. But even as he draws, he feels the inadequacy of the attempt, the impossibility of capturing something so vast, not just in size, but in meaning, in weight, in the accumulated pressure of all the eyes that have looked upon these walls, all the feet that have walked through these passages, all the hearts that have beaten in the presence of this enduring thing. And so his sketching becomes meditative rather than documentary, the movement of pencil on paper, a way of communing rather than recording, a conversation between his hand and the stone, between his moment and all the moments that have layered themselves here, like sediment, like the slow deposit of meaning that time leaves behind. An hour passes, or perhaps two. Time moves differently here, stretching and compressing according to laws that have nothing to do with clocks. They walk around the great oval, pausing often, saying little, letting the building speak in its own language of shadow and substance, of survival and slow surrender. By mid-morning, they find themselves in the forum proper, walking the sacred way as countless feet have walked it before, and William notices how the stones are worn smooth, polished by the passage of centuries, dipping slightly in the center where the traffic was heaviest. Here a section of marble pavement, there a row of brick, fragments of different ages layered upon each other like memories that don't quite align, but together form something coherent, something that tells a story even if the details have blurred. They pause at the Temple of Saturn, its remaining columns standing with a dignity that seems almost defiant, refusing to fall even as so much else has fallen around them. Pemberton touches the base of a column, his palm flat against stone that was quarried and carved and set in place by hands that knew skills now forgotten, and William does the same, feeling the surprising warmth of the marble, heated by the sun, alive in its way, still performing its function of holding up, holding together, holding on. They wander without hurry, without agenda, letting their feet choose the path, and the path leads them past the Arch of Septimius Severus, its relief carvings still sharp enough to read, telling stories of victories that mattered desperately once and now matter only as patterns in stone, as examples of what humans care about, what they commemorate, what they believe will last. And it has lasted, William thinks, but not in the way they intended. It has lasted not as a celebration, but as a meditation, not as propaganda, but as poetry, the meaning transformed by time into something gentler, something that asks less and offers more. A cat sleeps in the sun on a fallen capital, its body curled into the hollow where an acanthus leaf once flourished in marble. And this too seems right, seems part of the ongoing life of these ruins, the way nature and time and small living things reclaim what was built to resist reclamation. Birds nest in the high places, lizards dart across warm stones, wild flowers grow in cracks where there should be only emptiness, and William sees that the ruins are not dead but differently alive, hosting a quieter kind of existence, a slower rhythm, a peace that comes only after striving has ceased. They sit for a while on a fragment of entablature, sharing bread and wine, and the simple act of eating here, in this place, makes them participants rather than merely observers, makes them part of the long human story of dwelling in this valley, of making use of these stones, of finding rest where rest is offered. The Pantheon waits for them in the afternoon, and approaching it through the narrow streets of the city, William is unprepared for the shock of space that greets him when they step through the great bronze doors and into the interior, where the geometry of perfection has been rendered in stone and emptiness. The dome rises above them, that impossible dome, and at its apex, the oculus opens to the sky, a perfect circle of light that moves across the floor as the hours pass, a sundial built by gods, or those who understood what gods might want. Not worship, perhaps, but attention, awareness, the simple act of watching light move through space, marking time's passage in the most beautiful way imaginable. William tilts his head back, staring up, and feels a vertigo that is not unpleasant, a sense of being unmoored from the ground, suspended between earth and heaven in a place designed precisely for that suspension. The proportions are perfect. The diameter equals the height. The sphere would fit exactly if it were rendered complete. And this perfection does something to the mind, to the breathing, to the quality of thought itself. Pemberton says nothing, and William is grateful for the silence, for the permission to simply stand and be and experience this space that has survived intact while so much else has crumbled. This space that has been continuously inhabited, transformed from temple to church, but somehow remaining essentially itself, its purpose unchanged, even if the names of the gods have changed. The light from the oculus is golden now, late afternoon light, thick and substantial, almost liquid as it pours down into the dim interior. And in that column of light, William can see motes of dust dancing, each one catching fire for a moment before falling back into shadow. And he thinks about how everything is always in motion, even in places that seem most still, most permanent, most eternal. Time is passing here just as it passes everywhere, but gently, slowly, with a grace that makes the passing feel less like loss and more like transformation, less like ending and more like continuation. They walk the perimeter of the rotunda, their footsteps echoing softly against marble floors, past the niches that once held statues of gods and now hold altars and chapels, past the tombs of kings and artists, past all the layers of use and meaning that have accumulated here. And William feels that he is walking through not just a building, but through time itself, through the membrane that separates past from present, finding it thinner here, more permeable, more willing to let him pass back and forth, to stand in multiple centuries at once. Evening finds them returning to the Forum, drawn back as if by invisible threads to the place where their Roman day began. And in the golden hour before sunset, the ruins take on a quality that is almost dreamlike. The harsh edges softened, the stones glowing from within as if they have absorbed the sun all day and are now releasing it slowly, reluctantly, into the cooling air. They walk more slowly now, exhausted not in body but in soul, in the part of themselves that receives and processes and attempts to hold all that they have seen, all that they have felt, all the layers of time and meaning and human aspiration that Rome has shown them in this single extraordinary day. William's sketchbook is full of fragmentary drawings, a capital here, an arch there, the curve of the Pantheon's dome rendered in quick strokes, but he knows that the real record is being written somewhere deeper, in a place that needs no paper, no ink, in the part of memory that deals with moments that change us, that shift our understanding of what is possible, of how much beauty the world can hold, of how long some things can last if they are made with sufficient care and skill and love. Pemberton walks beside him, his hand occasionally gesturing toward a particular stone or inscription, but mostly he too is quiet, content to let the experience settle, to let the city speak its final words for this day. They find a place to sit, high on the Palatine Hill, where they can look down over the Forum as the light fades and the shadows grow long and the first stars begin to appear in the darkening sky above the ancient stones. And William thinks about all the people who have sat here, on this hill, looking at these same ruins, some when they were new and glorious, some when they were already old, some like himself encountering them with fresh eyes and full hearts. And he feels connected to that long chain of witnesses, that procession of humans who have looked at what other humans built and felt something stir in themselves, some recognition of shared humanity, of the dreams that persist even when the stones begin to crumble, even when empires fall, even when all that remains is the shape of what was and the memory of what it meant. The city settles into twilight, and they sit a while longer, not speaking, not needing to speak, just being present to the ending of this day, this first day among the ruins, this day that has opened something in William that he suspects will never quite close again. A door to the past that once opened remains forever ajar, letting light pass between then and now, between what was and what is, between the stones that sleep below and the dreams that rise above, drifting upward into the Roman night, like prayers, like promises, like the eternal breath of history itself. And so the breath of history carries them southward, away from the eternal city, away from the familiar columns and arches of Rome, towards something older still, something stranger, something preserved not by reverence, but by catastrophe. The carriage rolls along the coastal road, and the morning light filters through a gauze of coastal mist, softening the edges of the world. William watches the landscape change through the window, the umbrella pines giving way to vineyards, the vineyards yielding to rougher country where the earth remembers its fire. Mount Vesuvius rises in the distance, serene and deceptive, wearing its crown of clouds like a mountain that has forgotten its own violence, like a sleeping giant who dreams peacefully of the destruction it once wrought. Pemberton reads aloud from Pliny the Younger's letters, his voice gentle and measured, describing that terrible day in 79 when the sky turned dark at noon, when ash fell like snow, when the earth shook and the sea withdrew. But here in the carriage, centuries removed, the words are merely sounds, a lullaby of ancient tragedy made safe by distance and time. William listens with half his attention, the other half given to the rhythmic motion of the wheels, the gentle swaying that rocks him like a cradle, like the rocking of a boat on calm water. They pass through small villages where laundry hangs motionless in the still air, where dogs sleep in patches of sun, where time itself seems to have slowed to the pace of drying grapes and aging wine. The excavations at Pompeii are recent, tunnels and shafts driven into the hardened ash, revealing what no one has seen for 17 centuries. William feels a strange anticipation, not eager or anxious, but soft and wondering, like a child approaching a door that has always been locked and finding it, at last, slightly open. The carriage slows, and they descend into a landscape both ancient and raw. The excavations spread before them, partially cleared streets, emerging walls, the exposed bones of a city that stopped breathing in a single afternoon. Workmen move slowly in the distance, their tools making soft scraping sounds against stone and compressed ash. A guide approaches, speaking in accented English, gesturing toward the uncovered pathways. And William steps down from the carriage onto ground that is neither past nor present, but some threshold between, where the volcanic earth has held everything in suspension, waiting. They walk slowly toward the first street, and with each step, William feels the layers of time growing thin, translucent, permeable. The air smells of dust and dry earth and something else, something faint and indefinable, perhaps only imagined, the ghost of a city's last breath, preserved in ash and memory. Pemberton walks beside him, unusually quiet, his classical learning suddenly made tangible, made real. They pause at the threshold of the ancient city, where the modern world ends and the excavated past begins, and for a long moment, they simply stand there, listening to the silence, feeling the weight of all those buried years rising to meet them like a tide, like a greeting, like a whisper that says, "We have been waiting. We have been here all along. We have been sleeping beneath your feet, and now at last you have remembered us. Now at last you have come home." The streets of Pompeii emerge from the earth like memories surfacing from deep sleep, partial and fragmentary, yet somehow complete. William and Pemberton walk slowly down the Via dell'Abbondanza, their footsteps echoing softly against stones that once knew the traffic of merchants and slaves, philosophers and children, ordinary people living ordinary lives with no knowledge of the extraordinary preservation that awaited them. The paving stones are worn smooth by 17 centuries of burial, and the ruts carved by ancient cart wheels still mark the roadway, grooves worn deep by repetition, by the daily passage of vehicles carrying wine and oil and grain through a city that thought itself eternal. Doorways open on either side, black rectangles leading into shadow, into rooms where the ash fell thick and smothering, preserving everything it touched. William pauses at one threshold, then another, and the rhythm of it becomes a meditation. Approach, pause, peer into darkness, imagine. The guide explains that these were shops, these were homes. This was a bakery where carbonized loaves were found still in the oven. This was a tavern where cups stood ready on the counter. But William barely hears the words. He is listening to something else, some quieter voice that speaks without language, the voice of spaces that remember their purpose even in emptiness. They enter a villa, the house of the tragic poet, the guide calls it, and the rooms unfold in a gentle sequence. First, the atrium, open to the sky, where rainwater once collected in a shallow pool, and where now there is only absence, only the shape of what was. The walls bear frescoes, their colors faded to whispers of red and gold and blue, depicting scenes from mythology, gods and heroes frozen in their eternal gestures, painted by hands that turned to ash, admired by eyes that closed forever on that August day. William traces the outline of a painted figure with his gaze, following the graceful curve of a robe, the delicate gesture of a hand, and feels the presence of the artist like a ghost standing beside him, patient and content to wait these many centuries for someone to finally see, to finally acknowledge the work. Room follows room in a dreamlike procession. A bedroom where the walls are painted with garden scenes, as though to expand the space beyond its physical boundaries, as though to bring the outdoors in, vines and birds and flowering shrubs rendered in pigment and imagination. A dining room with couches arranged around the perimeter, where guests once reclined and laughed and argued philosophy, while servants brought wine and honeyed dormice and lamprey from the bay. An inner courtyard, small and intimate, where the family might have sat in the evening, listening to the fountain's gentle music, watching the stars appear above the compluvium, never knowing that those same stars would look down on these same stones for 2,000 years, waiting for this moment, this quiet meeting between William's present and their distant past. Pemberton reads an inscription carved into the stone of the threshold. "Salve," it says, "welcome," and the word hangs in the air like an invitation across centuries, like a host greeting guests who are impossibly late, yet still somehow expected. They move from villa to villa, and each one repeats the pattern: threshold, atrium, rooms radiating outward, the architecture of daily life made sacred by its preservation, made precious by its loss. The repetition is soothing, hypnotic, each house a variation on the same theme, each doorway a passage, not just from room to room, but from moment to moment, from breath to breath, from one heartbeat of discovery to the next. The frescoes speak in colors that have forgotten their brightness, in pigments that have faded to the palette of dreams, ochre and terracotta, pale rose and weathered azure, the gold leaf tarnished to a gentle bronze. William stands before a wall painting in the Villa of the Mysteries, and the figures seem to move in the flickering light of the guide's lamp, seem to process in their eternal ritual, their gestures both mysterious and familiar, both sacred and domestic. The scenes unfold in panels, telling a story no one can quite interpret, depicting rites that vanished with the people who performed them. Yet the painted faces remain calm, serene, as though they know something the living have forgotten, as though they hold some secret about the nature of time and preservation and the strange immortality that comes not from memory, but from burial. Pemberton murmurs about Dionysian mysteries, about initiation rites, about the scholarship and speculation that surrounds these images. But William is not listening to the words, only to the sound of them, the gentle rhythm of academic wonder, the lullaby of learned curiosity. He lets his eyes rest on one figure, then another, following the progression around the room. A woman reading, a child startled, a winged figure raising her hand, a bride preparing, each gesture frozen at its peak, each expression caught mid-feeling, neither beginning nor ending, but simply being, eternally present in their painted moment. They walk through more villas, more gardens, more rooms where the walls are windows into vanished lives. In one house, a lararium, a household shrine, still holds its painted gods, the household deities who failed to protect their worshippers, but who remain nonetheless faithful guardians of an empty home. In another, a garden has been partially restored, the excavators having filled the voids left by roots and plants with plaster, creating ghostly casts of ancient vegetation, the shapes of bushes and small trees that grew and died on that terrible day, their forms preserved as negative space, as absence made visible. The sun moves slowly across the sky, and the shadows lengthen in the silent streets. William and Pemberton walk without hurry, without destination, simply moving from discovery to discovery, each one similar to the last, each one unique in its details. A fountain dry for 1,700 years, a shop counter with amphora-shaped holes where wine jars once stood, a thermopolium, an ancient fast food counter, its painted menu still visible, advertising foods no living tongue has tasted. The accumulation of small observations of quiet details creates a kind of trance, a gentle stupor of attention where the boundaries between observer and observed begin to soften, where William is no longer quite sure if he is walking through these streets or if the streets are walking through him, carrying him along in their current of preserved time. They pause in the Forum, where columns stand in fragmentary rows like broken teeth, where the paving spreads wide and empty beneath the sky. This was the heart of the city, Pemberton explains, where business was conducted, where justice was administered, where people gathered to hear news and gossip and debate. But now there is only silence and space and the long afternoon light that turns everything to gold, that softens every edge, that makes the ruins look less like destruction and more like sculpture, less like endings and more like pauses, as though the city is not dead but merely resting, merely sleeping through the centuries, breathing so slowly that only the stones can detect it, waiting for some distant dawn when the volcanic ash will bloom with impossible flowers and the streets will fill again with voices, with footsteps, with the ordinary miracle of daily life. The journey to Herculaneum is brief, a short passage along the coast to a sister city that suffered the same fate but experienced it differently. Where Pompeii was buried in ash and lapilli, Herculaneum was entombed in pyroclastic flows, in superheated mud that hardened to stone, that sealed the city not in fragile ash but in volcanic rock, preserving it differently, more completely, with greater fidelity to the smallest details. William and Pemberton descend into the excavations, for here the ancient city lies below the modern town, buried deeper, and the sensation is not of walking across a ruined surface, but of descending into the earth itself, of going down into layers of time made literal and geological. The streets here are narrower, the buildings more intact. Where Pompeii feels open and exposed, Herculaneum feels enclosed, intimate, as though the city is whispering rather than speaking. The houses rise 2 and 3 stories in places, their upper floors still bearing wooden balconies, impossibly, miraculously preserved, the timber carbonized but not destroyed, turned to something almost like stone, but retaining the grain, the texture, the memory of having once been living wood. William reaches out to touch a wooden beam and then stops, his hand hovering just above the surface, unwilling to disturb the fragile permanence, unwilling to add his touch to the burden of time this object has already borne. They enter the House of the Deer, named for the bronze sculptures found within, graceful animals frozen in mid-leap, attacking and attacked, a scene of violence rendered beautiful by artistry and patina. But it is not the sculptures that hold William's attention. It is the details, the ordinary things. A rope, still coiled where someone left it. A wooden cradle, empty, waiting. A loaf of bread, carbonized to black stone, but still recognizable, still shaped like the staff of life, still bearing the stamp of the baker who made it on the last morning of the city's life. Pemberton speaks more quietly here, as though the deeper burial demands deeper reverence, as though descending into the earth requires lowering one's voice. He points out the sophistication of the architecture, the elegance of the marble floors, the delicacy of the mosaics. Neptune and Amphitrite, rendered in tiny tesserae of glass and stone, their colors still bright beneath the volcanic seal. But again, William finds himself drawn to the humbler things, to the evidence of ordinary existence, the worn threshold, the cooking pots, the latrine in the corner of a courtyard, the utterly mundane details that make these ancient people suddenly, startlingly real. They walk through the public baths, where the vaulted ceilings still soar overhead, where the plunge pools are still visible, their marble stained by centuries of burial, but still smooth, still inviting. William imagines the heat, the steam, the voices echoing against stone, men talking of business and politics and family, women in their separate chambers doing the same, children splashing and being scolded, the universal rituals of cleanliness and relaxation, of community and solitude. The baths are empty now, silent now, the water long since evaporated or turned to mineral deposits. But the space remembers its purpose, holds the shape of its function like a cup holds the memory of wine. As they emerge from the deeper excavations, climbing back toward the surface, toward the present, the light seems brighter, the air fresher, and William carries with him the weight of what he has seen, not a heavy weight, but a gentle one, like carrying water in cupped hands, careful not to spill a drop. The cities frozen in time have given him something, some gift he cannot yet name, some understanding that exists below language, in the realm where stones speak and silence sings, and the past is not gone, but only sleeping, waiting, breathing slowly beneath the earth. Evening falls gently over the Bay of Naples, and William stands in the empty amphitheater of Pompeii, the last sight of their day, the final doorway crossed, the last threshold of this chapter of discovery. The stone seats rise in concentric curves around him, tier upon tier, row upon row, each one worn smooth by the countless bodies that once sat here, watching spectacles of drama and music, of triumph and tragedy performed on the stage below. The acoustics are perfect still. When William speaks softly, his voice carries clearly across the space, and Pemberton, standing on the opposite side, hears every word as though whispered directly into his ear. But William does not speak. He only stands and listens to the silence, to the quality of quiet that fills an empty theater. A silence that is not the absence of sound, but the presence of potential sound. Of all the voices that once filled this space and might fill it again, in memory, in imagination, in the theater of the mind. The sky deepens through shades of blue, azure to sapphire to indigo, and the first stars begin to appear, faint and far, the same stars that looked down on this amphitheater on its last day of use, the same stars that have watched empires rise and fall, cities flourish and perish, generations succeed generations in an endless procession. William feels very small beneath that sky, very temporary, very fragile, and yet also connected to something vast and enduring, to the long chain of human beings who have stood beneath these same stars and wondered, who have walked among ruins, and felt the strange comfort of knowing that nothing lasts and yet everything remains, that endings are also preservations, that what is lost is not gone but only changed, transformed, translated into a different language of memory and stone. Pemberton climbs slowly to where William stands, and together they sit on one of the stone benches, high enough to see over the amphitheater's rim to the city beyond, to the dark silhouette of Vesuvius against the darkening sky, to the scattered lights of the modern settlements that have grown up around and above the ancient buried streets. Neither man speaks. There is nothing to say that the silence does not say better, no words that would not diminish the fullness of this moment, this quiet communion with time and place and the enduring mystery of human existence. The day's discoveries settle in William's mind like sediment in still water, layer upon layer, the streets and doorways, the frescoes and mosaics, the bread and the rope and the cradle, the grand and the humble, the sacred and the ordinary, all of it equally preserved, all of it equally precious. He understands, in a way that surpasses understanding, that these cities were buried not as punishment, but as gift, not destroyed, but saved, held in suspension, so that centuries later, travelers like himself could walk through them and remember what it means to be human, to build and create, to live and love and leave traces, to pass through time and yet leave something behind, however small, however fragile, however unlikely to survive. The stars grow brighter as the sky grows darker, and the ruins fade into shadow, becoming less distinct, less specific, more archetypal. The amphitheater around them could be any amphitheater, the city below any ancient city, the moment, any moment when past and present touch and recognize each other across the gulf of years. William feels his eyes growing heavy, his breathing slowing, his thoughts becoming softer and more diffuse, like smoke rising from a dying fire, like mist dissolving into air. He lets himself drift on this feeling, this gentle letting go, this release into the current of time that carries everything along, that wears away all distinctions, that eventually makes all moments one moment, all places one place, all ruins one ruin, eternal and peaceful and still, where doorway after doorway opens onto the same quiet darkness, the same welcoming shadow, the same deep and restful sleep that claims all cities, all civilizations, all travelers at the end of their journeying, gathering them gently into its keeping, preserving them perfectly in the amber of memory, in the volcanic ash of dreams. And from those dreams, from that volcanic stillness, the journey continues, as all journeys must, flowing like water toward the sea, toward new shores where other ancient stones await. The morning breaks gently over the Bay of Naples, and William finds himself standing at the harbor, watching the preparations for the voyage to Sicily. The ship that will carry them is a merchant vessel, its sails the color of old parchment, its wooden hull weathered by countless crossings of these timeless waters. Mr. Pemberton arranges their trunks and cases with his characteristic precision, ensuring that William's sketches and journals are wrapped in oilcloth against the spray. The sea spreads before them, vast and impossibly blue, its surface catching the morning light in 10,000 gentle undulations. There is something both exciting and deeply calming about this moment of departure. This stepping away from the solid earth onto the breathing, living surface of the Mediterranean. As the ship pulls away from the dock, William watches the coastline of Italy recede, watches Vesuvius grow smaller against the sky, that mountain of destruction and preservation, of endings and eternal beginnings. The rhythm of the waves replaces the rhythm of carriage wheels, a deeper, slower pulse, as old as the world itself. The sailors move about their tasks with the ease of long practice, adjusting ropes, trimming sails, their movements forming a kind of dance, a meditation of labor that has remained unchanged for centuries. William finds a place near the bow where he can watch the water sliding past, where he can feel the wind, warm and salt-laden, moving across his face. Hour after hour, the ship makes its steady way southward, and there is nothing to do but surrender to this pace, to this gentle rocking motion, to the endless meeting of sky and sea at a horizon that never grows closer. Mr. Pemberton reads from his Homer, the ancient Greek verses seeming especially appropriate out here on these wine-dark waters where Odysseus himself once wandered. Sometimes William listens to the words, and sometimes he simply listens to the sound of his tutor's voice blending with the sounds of wind and wave and creaking timber. The sun traces its familiar arc overhead, and the light shifts from the bright clarity of morning to the softer, more golden tones of afternoon. Dolphins appear alongside the ship, their sleek bodies cutting through the water with effortless grace, and William watches them, mesmerized by their play, by the pure joy of their movement. They stay for a while, these companions, and then they vanish as suddenly as they appeared, diving down into depths where no human eye can follow. As evening approaches, a dark smudge appears on the southern horizon, gradually resolving itself into mountains, into the unmistakable form of an island. Sicily. The name itself carries weight, carries history. Greek colonies and Phoenician traders, Roman granaries and Norman castles, layer upon layer of civilization built upon this stone surrounded by sea. The ship adjusts its course, angling toward the southern coast, and as the light begins its slow fade into dusk, William can just make out pale columns rising against the darkening sky, temples standing sentinel over the shore, waiting as they have waited for more than 2,000 years. The approach is gradual, dreamlike, the details emerging slowly from the gathering twilight. By the time they drop anchor in a sheltered bay, the first stars have begun to appear, and the temples on the hillside above glow faintly in the last light, like memories made visible, like dreams rendered in stone. Morning in Sicily arrives with a quality of light that William has never quite experienced before. Something clearer, more luminous, as if the sun here shines through air that has been purified by its passage over hundreds of miles of open water. They come ashore in a small boat rowed by local fishermen, men whose faces are weathered like the stones they have come to see, whose hands know both the sea and the land with equal intimacy. A guide is waiting for them, a Sicilian scholar who speaks Italian with an accent that seems to carry traces of Greek, of Arabic, of Norman French, all the tongues that have washed over this island through the centuries. His name is Giuseppe, and his knowledge of the ancient sites is profound, though he wears it lightly, sharing it as one might share bread or wine, as a simple gift. They set out on horseback toward Agrigento, following roads that are sometimes Roman, sometimes older than Rome, sometimes merely paths worn by shepherds and their flocks. The countryside unfolds around them in gentle hills covered with olive groves and wild herbs, rosemary and thyme and sage, their fragrance rising in the warming air. This is a landscape shaped by human hands over millennia, yet never quite tamed, always retaining something wild, something that remembers when these hills were sacred to older gods. As they climb toward the ridge where the temples stand, Giuseppe tells them stories, his voice falling into the cadence of a man who has told these tales many times before, who understands their power to transport the listener. He speaks of the Greek colonists who came here in the 6th century before Christ, who built these temples to honor their gods in this far western outpost of the Hellenic world. He tells of Agrigento's glory days, when it was among the richest cities in the ancient world, its wealth built on grain and wine and trade. And he tells of the city's fall, of Carthaginian sieges and Roman conquest, of earthquakes and neglect, of the slow, patient work of time that reduces all human ambition to these beautiful ruins. And then, as they crest the ridge, the temples appear, and all words fall away. They stand in a line along the crest of the hill, these temples, facing south toward the sea, toward Africa, toward the wider world. The Temple of Concordia rises before them, impossibly intact, its columns still supporting their architrave and pediment, still defining that perfect space between earth and sky that the Greeks understood so well. The stone is a warm honey color, the local limestone that holds light like memory. William dismounts slowly, hardly breathing, his artist's eye trying to take in the proportions, the harmony, the way the temple seems to grow naturally from the hill it crowns. They approach on foot, walking the ancient path that countless pilgrims and priests once walked. The grass is scattered with spring wildflowers, tiny blooms of white and yellow and purple, and the sound of their footsteps is soft, absorbed by earth and air. Mr. Pemberton says nothing, and William is grateful for the silence, for this space to simply perceive, to allow the reality of the temple to sink into his awareness. They pass between the columns, entering the space of the peristyle, and overhead the blue Sicilian sky is framed by golden stone. The fluting of the columns draws the eye upward, always upward, toward the infinite. Time seems to slow, or perhaps to become irrelevant. They are standing in the same space where priests stood 2,300 years ago, under the same sun, beneath the same sky. The continuity is almost overwhelming in its simplicity. William reaches out and places his palm against one of the columns, feeling the stone's warmth, its solidity, its patient endurance. The stone has texture. It is not perfectly smooth, but shows the marks of ancient tools, the slow weathering of centuries, the particular reality of a thing made by human hands to honor something greater than human understanding. They spend hours at Agrigento, moving slowly from temple to temple along the sacred ridge. After Concordia comes the Temple of Hera, smaller but equally beautiful, its columns standing open to the sky where once a roof sheltered the goddess's statue. Then the ruins of the Temple of Zeus, which Giuseppe tells them was once among the largest in the Greek world, supported by enormous columns and giant stone figures called telemones. Now it is a field of fallen drums, massive pieces of columns scattered like a giant's toys, testament to the earthquake that brought it down. But there is no sadness in this destruction, William realizes. There is only transformation, only the inevitable process by which even the mightiest works return to the earth that gave them birth. He sits on one of the fallen column drums to sketch, his pencil moving across the paper in the practiced strokes that have become second nature during these months of travel. Mr. Pemberton sits nearby, his eyes half closed, his face turned toward the sun, and William understands that his tutor is doing his own kind of sketching, committing this scene to memory, preserving it in the careful archive of his mind. The day grows warmer, and the scent of wild herbs intensifies, released by the heat, surrounding them in an invisible cloud of fragrance. Bees move among the wildflowers, their drowsy humming adding to the sense of timelessness, of natural cycles that continue regardless of empire's rise or fall. By early afternoon, Giuseppe suggests they rest during the hottest hours, as is the custom here, and they find shade beneath an ancient olive tree whose gnarled trunk might itself be as old as some of the ruins. William finds his eyelids growing heavy, the combination of the sea voyage, the morning's explorations, and the warm, still air creating an irresistible invitation to sleep. He drifts in and out of consciousness, aware of the dappled light filtering through olive leaves, of distant bird calls, of Mr. Pemberton's gentle snoring, of time moving slowly as honey, golden and sweet. When they wake, the light has shifted, has begun its slow transformation toward evening, and Giuseppe tells them there is time to visit one more temple before sunset. They mount their horses again and ride westward along the coast, the sea spreading below them, impossibly blue, marked here and there by the white sails of fishing boats. The landscape becomes wilder, less cultivated, and William has the sense of moving backward in time, away from the present and deeper into the ancient past. After an hour, they reach Selinunte, where temples stand scattered across a windswept plateau overlooking the sea. These ruins are different from Agrigento, more fragmentary, more wild, more thoroughly returned to nature. Columns lie broken where they fell, their drums separated like vertebrae of some enormous creature. Walls stand to partial height, framing empty spaces, defining rooms where no roof remains. And everywhere the stone is softened by lichen, by moss, by the slow, patient work of wind and rain. They dismount and walk among the ruins as the sun descends toward the horizon, as the light becomes richer, thicker, more golden. Giuseppe points out details, explains which temple was dedicated to which deity, but his voice grows softer, more dreamlike, as if he too feels the spell of this place, this threshold between land and sea, between past and present, between waking and dream. William finds himself at the base of a massive column, looking up at its broken capital silhouetted against the sky. Swallows circle overhead, their cries sharp and clear in the evening air. The sea breeze carries the salt smell, the herb smell, the stone smell, a combination that seems to contain the essence of this island, of this moment, of this particular place where Greek civilization once flourished and now sleeps. Mr. Pemberton comes to stand beside him, and together they watch as the sun touches the horizon. As the light transforms from gold to amber to rose, the pattern repeats itself over the following days, establishing a rhythm that becomes as natural as breathing, as inevitable as the tide. Each morning they wake in the small inn where Giuseppe has arranged their lodging, break their fast on bread and cheese and fruit, and set out for another temple, another ruin, another encounter with the ancient world. Sometimes they return to Agrigento, finding new perspectives on the temples they have already visited, discovering how different light reveals different truths. In the early morning, the temples are cool and gray, monumental and austere. By midday, they are brilliant, almost white, shimmering in the heat. But it is always in the evening that they seem most alive, most present, when the setting sun illuminates them from within, when they glow as if lit by some eternal flame. Sometimes they explore sites that are smaller, less intact, a scatter of column bases in an olive grove, a fragment of pediment half buried in earth, a solitary capital lying in a field. Giuseppe knows them all, has walked these hills and valleys his entire life, has traced the faint outlines of walls that no longer stand, has found coins and pottery shards and sometimes fragments of ancient sculpture. He shares this knowledge generously, but always with the understanding that the sites themselves are the true teachers, that the best learning comes from simply being present, from allowing these stones to speak in their own silent language. William fills sketchbook after sketchbook, his pencils worn down to stubs, his hands perpetually gray with graphite dust. He draws columns and capitals, pediments and friezes, the play of light and shadow on ancient stone. But he also draws the wildflowers at the temple's bases, the lizards sunning themselves on fallen drums, the shepherds who graze their flocks among the ruins, creating a continuity between ancient and modern, between past and present, between what was and what is. Mr. Pemberton spends his time in contemplation, sitting for long hours in the shade of the temples, his book open on his lap but often unread, his gaze fixed on something distant and internal. One evening, as they watch the sunset from the Temple of Concordia, he speaks of how he has spent his life studying the ancient world through texts, through the words of poets and historians and philosophers, but that being here, standing in these actual places, has transformed his understanding in ways he cannot quite articulate. The words, he says, were always pointing toward this light, this stone, this silence, this peace. William understands, or believes he does, though he is too young yet to fully grasp what his tutor means. But he feels something, standing here between these columns as the day fades, something that has no name, something that is both profound and simple, both extraordinary and completely natural. It is the feeling of connection, perhaps, of belonging to something vast and ancient and ongoing. It is the recognition that he is not separate from these ruins, from this history, but part of it, a link in a chain that stretches back to those Greek colonists and forward to descendants he will never know. The temples do not speak, but they communicate nonetheless, in the language of proportion and harmony, of endurance and change, of human aspiration and nature's patient response. Each visit follows the same gentle pattern, the approach across the landscape, seeing the temple from a distance, anticipation building slowly, the arrival, the first moments of presence, the eye adjusting to scale and detail, the exploration, moving around and through the structure, touching stone, noting the angle of the sun, the quality of the light, the stillness, the sitting or standing in quiet contemplation, allowing the mind to rest, to empty, to simply be, and finally the departure, the reluctant leaving, the looking back over one's shoulder as the temple recedes, becomes landscape, becomes memory. And always, always, the light gradually fading, the sun moving inexorably toward its nightly disappearance beyond the edge of the world, the sky transforming through its evening palette of colors, each moment beautiful, each moment dying into the next, each moment eternal. On their final evening in Sicily, Giuseppe leads them to a small temple they have not yet visited, a sanctuary dedicated to Demeter that stands on a hillside overlooking both the sea and the mountains. It is less grand than the others, more intimate, its scale somehow more human, more approachable. The columns are slender, almost delicate, and many have fallen, but those that remain define a space that feels sacred even now, even after 2 millennia of silence. The sun is already low, painting everything in shades of gold and amber, and the air is filled with the evening chorus of birds settling to roost, of insects beginning their night songs. They move slowly through the ruins, speaking little, each absorbed in his own thoughts, his own process of saying goodbye to these stones, to this island, to this chapter of their journey. William finds a place to sit on the temple's steps, facing westward toward the sea, and he watches as the sun descends, as the light thickens and deepens, as the world transforms from day toward night. Mr. Pemberton stands among the columns, his figure silhouetted against the glowing sky, and William sketches him quickly, wanting to capture this moment, this image of his tutor framed by ancient stone and dying light. Giuseppe sits nearby, smoking his pipe, the fragrant smoke drifting on the breeze, and his presence is comfortable, undemanding, the presence of someone who has witnessed this sunset 1,000 times and never grown tired of its beauty. The sun touches the horizon, and the sea catches fire, blazing with reflected light, a path of gold stretching from the shore to the sun itself. The temple stones glow as if heated from within, and for a moment everything is transformed, everything is gold, everything is light. And then the sun slips below the edge of the world, and the color begins to fade, to soften, the gold becoming amber, becoming rose, becoming purple, becoming blue. The first star appears, then another, and the sky deepens toward night. The temperature drops perceptibly, and William feels the coolness on his skin, welcomes it after the heat of the day. There is a moment, just after sunset, when the world seems to pause, to balance between day and night, between light and dark, between movement and stillness. And in that moment, sitting on these ancient steps, William feels utterly at peace, utterly present, utterly here. All the journeying that brought him to this moment, the departure from London, the crossing of the Channel, the passage through France and over the Alps, the months in Rome, the excavated cities of the south, the sea voyage to Sicily, all of it has led to this perfect instant of being. He closes his eyes and listens to the sounds around him. The whisper of wind through the columns, the distant murmur of the sea, the evening songs of birds, Giuseppe's quiet breathing, Mr. Pemberton's footsteps on ancient stone. When he opens his eyes again, the stars have multiplied, the sky is deep blue, and the temples around them are becoming shadows, becoming silhouettes, becoming memory. They make their way down the hillside as darkness gathers, following the path by feel as much as sight, their eyes adjusting to the growing dimness. The olive trees around them are dark shapes. The stones underfoot are pale suggestions of solidity. Somewhere below, lights begin to appear in the scattered houses of the town, warm, flickering points of flame against the darkness. They walk slowly, carefully, in comfortable silence, each carrying within them the accumulated peace of these days among the temples, the gathered stillness of these hours spent in the presence of ancient stone. By the time they reach the inn, the sky is fully dark, and the stars are scattered across it in their thousands, in their millions, the same stars that shone on the Greeks who built these temples, the same stars that will shine on travelers yet to come, century after century, millennium after millennium, constant and indifferent and beautiful. William climbs the stairs to his room, his body tired from the day's walking, his mind quiet and clear. He does not write in his journal tonight, does not sketch. He simply lies down and closes his eyes, and the images of the day drift through his mind like clouds. Golden columns, blue sea, scattered stones, fading light, the eternal meeting of earth and sky, stone and time, memory and dream, slowly dissolving, slowly softening, slowly carrying him down into sleep, into the same darkness that gathers the temples into its keeping, the same stillness that holds all ruins, all travelers, all journeys in its gentle, patient, everlasting embrace. And from that darkness, William wakes slowly, gently, to the soft light of early morning, filtering through the shutters of a small inn somewhere on the coast, the sound of water lapping against stone carrying up from the harbor below. And he rises without haste, without urgency, knowing that the journey continues, that there are more ruins to see, more ancient stones to stand before, but feeling also that something has shifted, that the discoveries no longer feel separate and distinct, but rather like variations on a single eternal theme, stone upon stone, column upon column, each site reflecting all the others in an endless, gentle echo. They board a ship, a simple vessel with worn sails the color of old parchment, and cross the water toward Greece. And the crossing itself becomes another meditation, the slow rise and fall of waves, the gradual change of light across the surface of the sea, the distant mountains growing clearer hour by hour, until finally the coast resolves itself into specific details. Olive groves climbing hillsides, small white buildings clustered around harbors, and beyond them, always beyond them, the suggestion of ruins, the promise of ancient stones waiting in their patient silence. William stands at the rail, his journal open but mostly empty, finding that words come less easily now, that the experience of each place has begun to overflow the capacity of language, becoming instead a kind of wordless knowing, a felt sense of connection to something older and deeper than any single monument or any single moment in time. The ship glides into harbor as the sun reaches its zenith, and they disembark into the warm, herb-scented air of Greece, and everything feels both new and familiar, both specific and universal, as if they have been here before, as if all the ruins they have visited were merely preparations for this. Or perhaps as if this is not a different place at all, but simply another facet of the same eternal landscape they have been wandering through all along. They find lodging in a house with thick walls and small windows, and that evening, sitting in the courtyard where grapevines tangle overhead and the last light glows amber on whitewashed stone, Pemberton speaks softly of the ancient Greeks, of philosophers and playwrights, of gods and heroes, but his words too seem to blur at the edges, to become part of the general texture of the place, the sound of his voice blending with the sound of cicadas, with the distant bleating of goats on the hillside, with the whisper of wind through olive leaves, all of it folding together into a single, seamless experience of being here, now, in this place where time moves differently, where past and present exist, not as separate realms, but as layers of the same ongoing, ever-present moment. And as the light fades and the stars begin to appear, one by one, in the deepening blue overhead, William feels the day settling into his body like sediment drifting down through still water, all the images and sensations finding their places, arranging themselves not as memories of specific events, but as part of a larger pattern, a pattern that includes all the ruins, all the journeys, all the quiet moments of standing before ancient stones and feeling the weight of centuries pressing gently against the present. And he closes his eyes, letting the sounds of evening wash over him, letting the journey continue even as he sits motionless, even as he drifts towards sleep, knowing that tomorrow there will be more stones, more columns, more temples, and that each one will be both unique and exactly the same, both new and infinitely familiar, and that this paradox is itself the gift, the gentle lesson of the ruins, the soft truth they whisper to all who come to stand before them. Athens rises before them in the morning light, the Acropolis crowning the city like a thought-made stone, the Parthenon's columns catching the sun and holding it, glowing with that particular quality of light that seems to come not just from above, but from within the marble itself, as if the stone remembers the quarry, remembers the mountain, remembers the deep earth, and carries that memory into the open air. They climb the slope slowly, pausing often, not from fatigue, but from a kind of reverence that requires time, requires stillness, requires the gradual approach rather than the hurried arrival. Other travelers pass them, moving more quickly, exclaiming at the views, sketching frantically. But William and Pemberton have learned a different rhythm now, have learned that the ruins reveal themselves not to haste, but to patience, not to eagerness, but to a kind of receptive quietness, a willingness to simply be present, without grasping, without trying to capture or possess. They pass through the Propylaea, through the gateway that has framed this passage for more than 2,000 years, and step into the sacred precinct, and here, on this rocky summit, with the city spreading below and the mountains rising beyond and the sea glinting in the distance, William feels something shift again, feels the layers of time becoming even more transparent, more permeable, until he can almost see the ancient processions, almost hear the voices of priests and priestesses, almost smell the incense and the smoke of offerings, not as ghosts or visions, but as presences that exist alongside the present moment, occupying the same space, the same stones, the same shafts of sunlight falling between columns. They walk around the Parthenon slowly, observing how the columns lean slightly inward, how the horizontal lines curve subtly to correct for optical illusion, how every element has been calculated and crafted to create an impression of perfect proportion, perfect harmony, and yet the perfection itself has been softened by time, by weather, by the patient work of centuries, so that what remains is not the ideal of perfection, but something gentler, something more human, the beauty of intention, shaped and mellowed by the passage of years. William reaches out, places his palm against a column, feels the warmth of sun-heated marble, feels the slight roughness where the surface has weathered, and in that touch establishes a connection that runs backward through time, through all the hands that have touched this stone, all the eyes that have looked upon it, all the feet that have walked this circuit, and forward too, toward all those who will come after, who will stand here, just as he stands now, feeling the same warmth, the same presence, the same quiet dissolution of boundaries between self and stone, between moment and eternity. They sit for a long time in the shade on the north side, looking out over Athens, and Pemberton speaks of democracy and philosophy, of tragedy and comedy, of the birth of ideas that still shape the world, but again his words seem less like information and more like music, less like teaching and more like accompaniment to the place itself. And William listens with half his attention, while the other half simply rests in the sensation of being here, of breathing this air, of watching light move across ancient stone, of feeling the slow turn of the earth, the patient wheel of seasons, the great cycles that carry temples and travelers, civilizations and individuals, all together through the vast, gentle current of time. As afternoon deepens, they descend slowly, pausing at overlooks, watching the light change on the city below, and William realizes that he is no longer trying to remember, no longer trying to preserve or capture the experience, but simply allowing it to move through him, allowing himself to be the space where past and present meet and mingle, where stone and sky, memory and dream, blend into a single, seamless awareness that requires nothing, grasps nothing, and in requiring nothing, receives everything. The journey to Delphi carries them into mountains, up winding roads where cypress trees stand like dark flames against pale stone, where springs trickle down rock faces, where the air grows thinner and clearer and seems to carry sounds from great distances, the bells of goats, the calls of birds, the whisper of wind through ancient groves. They arrive in late afternoon, when the sanctuary lies in shadow, but the valley below still glows with sunlight. And the contrast creates a sense of liminality, of standing at a threshold between light and dark, between earth and sky, between the ordinary world and something other, something that the ancients understood as sacred, as a place where the boundary between human and divine grows thin and permeable. The ruins here feel different from those in Rome or even Athens. Less monumental, more intimate, built into the mountainside as if they grew from the rock itself, as if the stone of the temples and the stone of the mountain are continuous, part of the same geological and spiritual formation. They walk the sacred way slowly, climbing toward the temple of Apollo, passing the treasuries that line the path like small shrines, each one a gift from a different city-state, a different community. And William thinks about the pilgrims who climbed this same path for hundreds of years, seeking oracles, seeking guidance, seeking some word from beyond the ordinary that might help them navigate their lives, their decisions, their fates. And he wonders what they found, whether the words of the oracle mattered as much as the journey itself, the climb, the waiting, the slow preparation of the soul to receive whatever wisdom might be offered. At the temple, only foundations and a few columns remain, but the site itself still carries a palpable presence, a quality of attention, as if the stones are listening, as if the mountain is listening. And standing here, William finds himself falling quiet, not just outwardly but inwardly, finds the constant stream of thoughts and observations that usually fills his mind beginning to slow, to space out, to leave gaps of simple silence between them. And in those gaps, something else emerges. Not thoughts, but a kind of wordless awareness, a sense of being held within something larger, something patient and enduring and utterly indifferent to individual concerns, yet somehow, paradoxically, completely attentive to them as well. They visit the theater, climbing to the highest seats where the entire sanctuary spreads below them. The temple, the treasuries, the valley stretching away into blue distance, and they sit there as the sun sinks toward the western mountains, watching shadows lengthen, watching light fade from gold to amber to rose to violet, and the gradual transition creates a meditation on impermanence, on the way each moment flows into the next, distinct yet inseparable, each one perfect in itself, yet always already dissolving into what comes after. Pemberton recites fragments of poetry, ancient lines about fate and freedom, about the limits of human knowing, about the wisdom of accepting what cannot be changed, and his voice blends with the settling dusk, with the cooling air, with the first stars emerging overhead, until it seems that the words are not coming from him, but from the place itself, from the accumulated centuries of seeking and questioning and standing here just as they stand now, looking out over the same mountains, the same valley, under the same slowly wheeling stars. As full darkness gathers, they make their way down by lantern light, the small flame casting moving shadows on ancient stones, and William feels each step as a kind of return, a gentle descent, not just down the mountain, but back into ordinary time, ordinary consciousness, and yet carrying with him something of the height, something of the clarity, something of the silence that lives at the heart of all ruins, all sacred places, all moments when the boundaries dissolve and past and present breathe together in the same still, spacious now. From Delphi, they journey to the islands, taking ships from harbor to harbor, and the travel itself becomes part of the meditation, the rhythm of departure and arrival, the hours spent watching water and sky, the slow approach to each new coast where ruins wait in their ancient stillness. And William notices that he has stopped anticipating, stopped planning, stopped trying to organize the experience into narrative or sequence, but instead allows each place to simply arrive, to simply be, and then to fade again as they move on, leaving behind not memories of specific details, but a general impression of stonework and sunlight, of columns and coastlines, of the endless variations on a single theme. They visit Delos, where the marble lions stand guard over a sacred lake that is now dry, where temples to Apollo and Artemis and a dozen other gods lie scattered across the small island like pieces of a puzzle that no longer needs solving, like words of a language that no longer needs speaking. And walking among them, William feels not sadness at their abandonment, but a kind of rightness, a sense that this too is part of their story, that ruins are not diminished by being ruined, but rather completed, that they achieve their fullest meaning, not in their original use, but in their long, slow return to the earth that gave them birth. The wind moves constantly across Delos, carrying the salt scent of the sea, rattling the dry grasses that grow between paving stones, and the sound becomes another form of speech, another kind of oracle, saying nothing specific, nothing translatable, but communicating nonetheless, offering a message that bypasses language entirely and goes straight to some deeper, older way of knowing. They visit temples on Paros, on Naxos, each one similar yet unique, each one offering the same elements: column, capital, architrave, the same proportions, the same relationship to landscape and light. And the repetition itself becomes hypnotic, becomes a kind of chant or mantra, column after column, stone upon stone, ruin after ruin, until the distinctions blur, and it no longer matters which island, which temple, which moment, because they are all the same moment, all the same eternal present, where ancient stones stand open to wind and weather, holding their silence, offering their presence to anyone who takes the time to stand before them, to breathe the same air, to feel the same sun, to participate however briefly in their patient vigil. William's journal entries grow shorter, more fragmentary, sometimes just a single line: stone and sky, light on marble, the same cypress trees. Always the same golden light, and sometimes just a date, or not even that, just a sketch, a few quick lines suggesting columns or a coastline, or the way shadows fall across ancient steps. And these fragments seem more true somehow than longer descriptions, more accurate, capturing not what the places looked like, but what they felt like, the essential quality beneath appearance, the presence beneath form. On an unnamed island, or perhaps William has simply forgotten to record the name, or perhaps it doesn't matter. Perhaps naming is itself a kind of grasping that he has learned to release. They find a small temple on a headland overlooking the sea, just a few columns and part of a foundation, and they sit there as evening comes on. And Pemberton does not recite poetry, does not speak of history or mythology, but simply sits in companionable silence. And the silence itself is complete, is sufficient, contains everything that might be said and more, contains the whole journey, all the ruins, all the centuries, all the travelers who have ever stood in such places and felt the boundaries dissolve, felt time expand and contract simultaneously, felt themselves both utterly insignificant and infinitely connected to everything, to stone and sky, to past and future, to the great patient turning of ages. And as stars appear one by one in the darkening east, and as the last light fades from the western sea, William feels himself settling, softening, releasing, all the observations and impressions of the journey sinking down through him like silt through water, finding their level, arranging themselves not as knowledge to be kept or stories to be told, but as something deeper, something that changes not what he knows but who he is. And he closes his eyes, listening to the waves below, to Pemberton's steady breathing beside him, to the vast silence of the ruins, and feels himself dissolving into that silence, becoming part of it, no longer a separate observer, but simply another element in the landscape, another stone, another shadow, another momentary form held briefly by the light before darkness gathers it in. And so the journey continues, or perhaps it has ended, or perhaps ending and continuing are not different things after all. Perhaps the journey has become a state of being rather than a movement through space, a way of seeing rather than a series of destinations. They visit more sites, or perhaps they return to the same sites again and again, or perhaps all sites are one site, all ruins, one ruin, all moments, one eternal moment, endlessly repeated, endlessly renewed, like waves on a shore, each one unique, each one identical, each one arriving and dissolving and arriving again. Stone upon stone, William thinks, or perhaps he doesn't think it, but simply feels it, the weight of stone, the presence of stone, the patience of stone, waiting through centuries, through millennia, waiting without intention, without purpose, simply being, simply standing, simply offering itself to wind and rain and the slow caress of time. Column after column rises into the same blue sky, supports the same vanished roofs, frames the same distant horizons, and walking among them is like walking through a forest where every tree is the same species, where the pattern repeats endlessly, yet never quite exactly, where each step forward is also a step deeper, a step inward, a step closer to some still point at the center where movement and stillness are revealed as two names for the same thing. The light is always golden, or is becoming golden, or has just been golden. The perpetual afternoon of memory, of dream, where time bends back on itself and all moments exist simultaneously, and William can no longer remember if he is moving forward through Greece or backward through Italy, if he is arriving or departing, if the ruins he sees are new discoveries or places he has visited before. And the uncertainty doesn't trouble him because it doesn't matter. Because the journey was never about arrival, was never about seeing new things, but about learning to see differently, about allowing the accumulated weight of centuries to press gently against the present moment until the present moment opens, expands, becomes transparent, becomes a doorway into something vaster and quieter and more patient than any individual life or any individual moment. His steps slow, matching Pemberton's steps, matching the pace of shadows lengthening across ancient paving stones, matching the rhythm of waves against distant shores, matching the great slow wheel of seasons and stars, and with each step something falls away, some urgency, some need, some idea about who he is or what he should be doing, until finally there is just walking, just breathing, just the sensation of sunlight warm on his face and stone cool beneath his hand, and the endless gentle presence of ruins standing open to the sky. The cypress trees are always the same, dark vertical accents against pale stone and blue sky, and they too seem eternal, seem to have always been here, seem to be not individual trees, but the idea of trees, the eternal form of which all actual trees are only temporary expressions. And William walks past them, or toward them, or perhaps in circles around them. And it doesn't matter, because the landscape is both infinite and intimate, both endlessly various and utterly uniform, and he is both lost in it and completely at home, both seeking and having found, both traveling and already arrived. Pemberton's voice comes from far away or very near, speaking of philosophers who taught that all is flux, that everything changes, that you cannot step in the same river twice, and then of other philosophers who taught that nothing really changes, that beneath appearance lies eternal form, unchanging and perfect. And then his voice fades into the general texture of sounds, wind and waves, and the settling of stones. And William understands that both are true, that everything changes and nothing changes, that the ruins have been standing here forever and are being born anew in each moment, that he himself is both the young man who departed London with such excitement and anticipation, and also ancient, also weathered, also marked by time, also slowly returning to the elements from which he came, stone to stone, dust to dust, light to light. And as the light continues to fade, though it seems to have been fading forever, seems to fade without ever quite reaching darkness, to remain always in that liminal space of dusk where forms soften and boundaries blur. William finds himself lying down, or perhaps sitting, or perhaps simply being, on warm stone that still holds the heat of the day, and the stone holds him the way it has held so many, pilgrims and travelers, priests and philosophers, farmers and soldiers, everyone who ever paused here, everyone who ever felt the sun and the wind, everyone who ever looked up at the same stars now beginning to appear overhead. And he feels that holding, that patient, impersonal support, and releases himself into it, releases the journey, releases the seeking, releases even the release, until there is just this, just now, just the eternal present, where all ruins rest, where all travelers come to rest, where stone and sky and consciousness meet and merge in one vast, gentle, undifferentiated peace. And he sleeps, or does not sleep, or passes into a state where sleeping and waking are no longer separate, where dreams and ruins occupy the same space, where everything dissolves into soft focus, into golden light, into the quiet darkness that holds all journeys, all discoveries, all ancient stones, all young travelers, all stories in its deep, patient, infinite embrace. Thank you for listening tonight. If this story helped you drift off, consider leaving a like and subscribing for more calming stories. Sweet dreams, and I'll see you next time.